Super, thank you.
Yep. Just didn't get a chance to reply to it right before the meeting. Good evening. Hope everyone's having a good Monday. Get started in just a minute. Just quickly trying to assign breakout rooms before we get started. But it is 5:30. Good evening. Like the kind lady says, we are recording tonight. This meeting is also being broadcast live and will be available on YouTube. Just as we're getting started, to try to limit crosstalk and everything, please continue to use the raise hand button when we're talking in this big room. We'll be using breakout rooms a couple of times tonight, and then you'll be free to not have to raise your hand every time. So before we get started with our next topic, which is number of counselors, any questions? Okay, great. So our topic is, our first topic for the evening is number of counselors. So Tigard currently has 4 counselors plus a mayor, makes 5 who serve on the council. And it's been that way since really the beginning, since the original charter. And let's take a look at what some other cities do. So everyone can see that on my screen. So cities with populations over 70,000, several use 6 counselors, so plus mayor, that is 7. That's the most. 4 out of the 8 cities in that category. 3 have 8 counselors, and 1, which is Portland, is moving towards 12 counselors. In cities with populations that are very similar to Tigard's, this does not include Tigard's, 4 have counselors, have 6 counselors. 1 does have 9, 1's 8, and 1's 4, and that is not a typo. There is a city around our population that does have 9 counselors, and they have a mayor who has the veto power and does not have a vote, except in cases of tie. Most of these other ones, some of them, I shouldn't say most, some of the other cities that do have an even number of counselors do also have a mayor who has a vote in case of tie, but in cities with an odd number, it's less likely to have that tie. And then in the cities with populations fewer than 35,000, it's most popular still to have 6 counselors than 4, 8, and 5. And that's that same thing with that odd number of counselors. That is a city that has a mayor who does not always have a vote, but does have a veto. So any questions there? Great. So really, oh, Jason, please.
Kim, I guess I just want to, like, that number, can you go back to the slide for just a second? I mean, there's a lot more cities that have less than 35,000 people in them. So, like, I mean, there's 250 or 70 cities in Oregon. So is this just like a group of ones that you were looking at, or what is the population of cities here?
Yeah, so these are the 30 cities in Oregon with a population of greater than 20,000, which is the same cities that I've been using for all of our
Okay.
reference points. Because
So greater than 20,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
that should be more clear. 20,000 to 35,000, those are the cities that are in that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for bringing that up. So some considerations that have come up already in our conversations when you have fewer counselors is you do hit a quorum when you hit 3 counselors together, which there are some pretty strict public meeting law requirements when you have a quorum of counselors together who are discussing city business. So this actually came up in our last meeting when we were talking about limitations on counselors. When you had when Jason and John were giving us some context about a counselor who was causing some issues, only one other counselor could go and talk to them at a time, because to have 2 other counselors would have presented a quorum. There's also, on the other side, there can be concerns about having a lot of counselors. That does require more city resources. Counselors do get paid a stipend, have some benefits, and then they are supported by city staff. Especially when you think about onboarding new counselors, there's an education period that goes along with that can be quite the staffing requirement. We are going to use breakout rooms for this discussion, but are there any questions from this group before we go to those breakout rooms? Okay, there was another question that was on the meeting guide that we are going to kind of move into this conversation too, just because it seems relevant. So the first 2 questions are: Tigard operates with 4. The mayor sits as the 5th. Is this still the appropriate number of counselors? And if you in your breakout room do not believe that it's the appropriate number of counselors, how many would you recommend, or would you for Tigard to have in the future? The second question is actually around our youth counselor. So if you watched the city council meeting on the dais, we have our 4 counselors, our mayor, but we also have a youth counselor who sits there. The youth counselor has the opportunity to present an advisory vote on many topics that come up in front of the city, and it's a position that is established at the discretion of the council. And so the question for this group is if this should remain as a position at the discretion of the council, or perhaps be added to the charter. And just for some context, when I looked over those 30 charters of cities between 20,000 to 700,000 that are in Oregon, and the youth counselor position does not come up in any other charter. And it's not currently in Tigard's charter. So we got a couple hands. Start with Zachary first, and then call on Jason.
So you said that counselors get paid. How much would Tigard counselors get paid for their work?
I actually don't know what the number is.
There's both a stipend and a car allowance and a cell phone allowance. It ends up being about $1,100 a month, I would say. I think is in that range, plus medical benefits if they want them.
I think it's less than that, Jason. I think it's like 700, and then the mayor gets substantially more than that.
Is that not including the car stipend, or did that go away recently or something? Because the total had been 1,100, and I thought it was increasing with inflation. But
I don't know about a car stipend, so
oh, but
are you clarity on it? I don't know.
It could be affected by your medical benefits too. If you're taking medical benefits from the city, that gets deducted out of that.
Sounds like we need clarity.
Somebody, city staff that know the exact number currently?
I don't think they're on this call, but it sounds like from between the 2 of you, we're looking at about $1,000 a month.
There you go.
And Jason, please.
Yeah, I guess I want to ask about the framing of the second part of this. That seems fairly limiting to me. In my attendance at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings in particular, we are really behind the times, whether Oregon's behind the times, it sounds like they are, there are many cities, large cities in what I would call relatively, maybe not particularly progressive parts of the country, where there are multiple members of the youth community who are full voting members of city councils. I was shocked when I first attended my first U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting and learned that there were large and medium-sized cities all over the country and that we were so behind, which is partly why I'd already made the proposal to add the youth city councilor under sort of an advisory position. But I guess I just want to ask about the framing of the question, because to me, that's not even necessarily, that seems overly limiting about the youth, because you're basically saying, should the youth city councilor be an advisory member of the council in the charter or remain at the discretion of the council? To me, there should be a question about whether the youth city councilor should be a full voting member of the city council, which isn't even posed here. So I just want to know how the framing of this question came.
Yeah, and we wrote it limiting on purpose. We had looked to see if there were other examples within Oregon and other ones that we found, and I really didn't see very much. And we also had the concern that a full voting member of the council would still need to be elected. And does it make sense for a elected position to be a person who couldn't vote for themselves? Was also a concern. So we did limit that purposefully. But I know we got several other hands that came up in response. So Margaret, please.
Yes, I guess this question's for Jason. At the meetings that they had, were these youth advisors elected since they vote? Were they elected by the?
Yeah, there were actually cities where, or entire counties where the elections officials actually hold a separate election for the youth to participate. Like they literally register like they're adults. They run the election like they're adults. Or like we would say, you know, in the current election process in Oregon is, and they were selected by youth folks that registered to vote. I mean, it was a full blown, this was not a joke of a process. It was like
they were not elected by the general population though.
No, they were elected by the youth members of the general population.
Interesting. If you would like to send me any cities, do you remember which cities those were? I'd be happy to look into that, and we can raise this as another topic later on. I just didn't see that in my research.
Yeah, we can certainly talk offline. It was so many. I mean, it was all over the place. Kansas. Yeah, we can talk offline. Kim, give me a call.
Shelby, please.
Yeah, so I do just want to come to your point and the point that's been made about voting for themselves. So that is in the Oregon Constitution, that to be an elector, a person has to be 18 or older. And so that is something that we cannot change in Tigard because that is the Oregon Constitution. So if we did put something in the charter about the youth member being elected, to the point Kim made, they could not actually vote for themselves if they were under 18. So that doesn't necessarily preclude them from serving, but we would have to define or redefine who an elector is for purposes of serving for city council, because right now, and we'll get to this topic in a bit, but right now the requirement is that they be a registered elector. And so that wouldn't be possible with the youth member.
Shelby. So it is still worth considering. Okay, so topics that we're going, oh, Zachary, sorry, please. Completely forgot.
It's okay. I was wondering, as of right now, how the youth, like, city council member gets elected. Because, I mean, I don't know. I feel like if we were to do it, like, maybe just an advisory vote would be a better option than a full-on vote. Because, like, that way, it's kind of like a learning experience. And it's like, hey, you know, if you stay here for a year and you know, enjoy it, and maybe you might consider, you know, keep working towards your goal and then try to get on city council once you're old enough.
So I can answer that one. The youth councilor right now is not elected. So the youth member is appointed by city council, and council appoints the person by resolution. Also for context, right now, the youth member can give an advisory vote on everything except land use and budget. And why those are excluded is because those are specifically have processes in state law that spell out who the voting decision maker is. And so in order to avoid any issues with what is the budget committee properly comprised, or for land use, is the decision maker proper in terms of appeal to the state land use board, we have said no advisory votes on those, just to keep things totally clear. So everything else, though, by council resolution, the youth member does give an advisory vote.
Great. So why don't we just spend our time in the breakout rooms today talking about the number of counselors that you recommend for Tigard. And we're going to start with, let's say, 15 minutes in the breakout rooms. And so it's 5:45 now, so those can go until 6. When you get into the room, please remember to select a recorder and somebody to report out, the same person to record and report out on your conversation. And Shelby and I will bounce between the 2 rooms, and we'll end the conversations at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Oh, did we exit before Karen? They started, they were still talking, I think.
The other group needed at least the full minute to wrap up too.
Well, we were done when we saw your 1 minute warning, but then right then a question came up. So there they are.
Welcome back. Shelby and I were. Oh, we still have a few folks who haven't made it back yet. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Shelby and I were checking in. I know one group completely finished, and then one group was still having a little bit of conversation. So it'll be good to get the whole group back together. So group 2, so the group that had Shelby hanging out. Would you like to go first?
That would be Zachary.
So yeah, Dolly basically thinks that doing it by 10,000 residents per counselor because it's about 55,000 right now, according to her. So we might as well put in 6 counselors so that we represent everyone. And this might be like potential for increasing the pool of people, even though we could have like more people. We just kind of were thinking that like 6 does sound like enough. And then we also debated, well, could we jump to 7? And John Cook came around to say that if they're not 7, 8. No, we jumped to 8. And John Cook came around to say that if it was 8, then it might be a little bit too much for the mayor having to like manage. And the mayor's not 100% full-time position, even though it is like supposed to like run the council and help, keep things running smoothly.
Jeanette, please.
Yeah, I just want to add excellent report, Zachary. And that we also had suggested 6 because of the potential addition of the no interference clause. And so that way you brought in the amount of folks who are on the council and it didn't enable weaponizing against certain counselors. Thank you.
Okay, so your group did reach consensus around 6. Okay. And group 1, please.
Okay, well, we saw pros to increasing so that all the boards and committees could be handled, effectively. It had to do with more population, and then also, as the city grows, they might be able to handle it now, but as we get more people, we may need more counselors. Kind of the cons were, Mayor Snyder mentioned some larger groups that are not, that can become more divisive and divide into factions. And that's a little bit less apt to happen when you have a smaller group that, can operate more efficiently. It doesn't seem to be related so much when we look at other cities to size and number. And it seems like the existing number are able to handle their existing board and committee assignments. So I think that we were basically okay with increasing, but I didn't feel a strong push towards that. What do you guys think?
I think most people in our group felt that way, with maybe the notable exception of you and I.
Okay. Yeah.
Margaret, please.
Looking at this and I can see with the idea of the size and I mean, Tigard are building more apartments so we get more people. I mean, we're pretty much landlocked, and so we're not going to have huge developments unless we go through and annex things like River Terrace and so on. But what I'm concerned at, and I didn't bring it up because I just thought of it, but are there enough people that are usually interested in running that you'd have a race or not? Because it's not always a good thing if you only have one person running for a position. But Tigard's never been the kind of city where you have 4 or 5 people running for one council position. And so if we expand it, are we going to get, you know, people that will run?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in the last election, we had 3 running for mayor, probably 4 running for the seats that Councilor Hu and Councilor Singh are sitting in, and then I think 3 voting, running in this for Councilor Wolf's seat. So there was competition.
Yeah, so you answered my question. Okay.
Yeah, but that's just the last election.
Yeah, okay.
And John, please.
I would say mainly in the last 10 years, it's really increased. Dolly was talking in our group about, you know, the first 20 years she was here, how it was sort of always the same 10 or 15, 20 people in the city doing everything. And in the last 10 years, how much it's changed. All of our advisory boards, we've increased the number of boards. We've increased the diversity on the boards. We've increased, you know, changing members on the board. And all of those people, a lot of times, really have nowhere to move on to, you know, to go afterwards. And so from that standpoint, if you look at the elections in the last 10 years, I would say we didn't have that problem. But before that, Margaret, there were times when, yeah, there would be 2 people running for 2 spots or 3 people running for 2 spots. And it really was difficult. I ran 2 elections, one, the first time I ran opposed, the second time I ran unopposed. So, you know, you're right. Sometimes I feel that before it was that way, but I feel in the last 10 years, that's really changed. And I think it's mainly because we've increased all the boards and commissions to have more people. And so they want more to do afterwards. So I really feel that's not the same case.
So the improved pipeline has improved it essentially improved the pipeline into elected official. Thank you for that context. And Jeanette, please.
Yeah, thanks, John, for bringing up the pipeline. I think that was vital and important. And the race that former Councilor Lube and I had, we had 7 people in our race. And so excellent question, Margaret, but definitely have seen an increase.
7, wow. Dolly, please.
Just as I said, the same thing. I support that. And Margaret, you're right. And but again, as a volunteer for over decades, I am seeing so many more people, especially because we're coming into the age of empowerment. You know, all these buzzwords, and there's leadership trainings everywhere. The Tigard TCC itself, the leadership, what do you call this, training that they do on a yearly basis produces over 20 wonderful, you know, empowered people, just strong and motivated shakers and movers. I think we have our growing population of shakers and movers are there. And CCE alone, we always have a waiting list of people wanting to come in just to be engaged into all our committees and stuff. So I'm very hopeful for that, and I think there's room for all of that growing, moving forward.
Thanks, Dolly. And Derek, please.
Yeah, this may be a question for you, Kim and Shelby. In your research, just something I was idly thinking about. Is there any precedent for tying the number of counselors to the actual number of people in the city, like population-wise, like thinking like the House of Representatives, and where it could actually adjust on a sliding scale based on, to prevent us from having to debate this again 20 or 30 years from now, just kind of a self-regulating mechanism?
It's an interesting idea. It is not present in the cities of over 20,000 in Oregon, and could lead to some pretty bad consequences if a city starts to shrink. I guess I think about those like large outliers, but it's an interesting idea. Jason, please.
Just because I think this is interesting, the main, and I think John Cook will agree with me about this, the main change, like thing that changed that got so much more community participation, not only are people, I guess, a little bit more engaged, I would say just in general, but the main change factor that took us from getting a couple applicants to 15 applicants for one border commission seat was next door.
Social media.
Next door specifically.
Yeah.
So just a fun fact that I think at first we were very confused about what was going on, because it happened almost like overnight. It felt very bizarre. And then we kept asking people and they would say, oh, I saw it on next door. I saw it on next door. And we were like,
Oh,
now we understand.
That's super interesting. So I've heard from the group, it sounded like there was one group that was had found consensus around 6 counselors, and the other group where you had some members some were in favor of staying with the 4, some were leaning more towards the 6, but it was a little.
Kim, it was more people that wanted 6 than 4.
It was. Okay.
I don't think we should be representing that like it was equal, because I don't think it was.
Thank
no, it's not something I would fall on the sword for. So, you know.
Okay. Dolly, please.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify, because that was my comment on coming up. I just said that it was a mathematical, it was logically mathematical for me to just go for 6 based on the per 10,000. I'm not suggesting that it should be a per 10,000. Just to be clear. Okay, that was just my presentation.
Thanks, Dolly, for the clarification. So I don't want to rush this conversation. It is a very big deal to add 2 seats to a council, recommend adding 2 seats to the council for the city, and it's adding 50% to our elected officials. So if there's any other comments that anyone would like to make or thoughts that they have, John, please.
Yeah, the comment, and Zachary did a great job. Thank you, Zachary. A lot of my main reason for wanting to add more had to do with the time commitment and the number of boards and commissions we have. So we have so many boards and commissions that every counselor has at least 3 or 4 boards and commissions that they're first chair on, and then they're also alternate on others. And so from that standpoint, it just is too many boards and commissions for them to manage. And so it makes it very difficult. So to me, it can be a reason that people wouldn't run for council, because they think it's just city council meeting, 3 hours once a week, maybe another meeting here or there. But in reality, it's quite a bit more. And just because it's 1 to 2 other meetings per week that they have due to boards and commissions.
Thank you, John. Tony, please.
And I don't think the cost, I mean, if we're talking, per counselor, 12,000 a year or 12,000 a year, and that includes medical and that, or insurance and that kind of stuff, is not a huge fiscal factor. So.
Thanks, Margaret. I had just called on Tony. So please use the raise hand feature when we can.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the input, and I think to John's point, the demands of the positions is also going to have an influence on the representation on the council. And you always want people that have available time, but you're also going to be restricting it from people who can't manage a full time 40, 60-hour work week plus all the council seats. So that means that's a big part of our population segment that won't be represented at all. They won't have their voices on the council because they simply can't. And allowing people to have a little more time would be great. So that might diversify the pool in addition to the 50% increase. So that was just kind of one of my thoughts.
Thank you, Tony. And Dolly, please. Oh, Dolly, you're muted.
Thank you. Regarding the time and everything, I'm also reminding ourselves that, the trending, like, look at us, it's virtual now. So the time that may be involved moving also towards the future. We don't know what those things are, but I'm repeating myself by saying there are more volunteers now, more people who are stepping up to the plate than I've ever seen. And I think it's a doable thing as people are learning to manage their time better, and we're less on the road because everything now is accepted as a virtual or hybrid world too.
Thanks, Dolly. And Nathan, please.
I think this is probably just a topic to put a pin in for later, but I think not that it should determine our thinking on, what we think the correct number is, but how we go about increasing, if we do choose to increase, like what the process is for that, I think has a big bearing on how well it will work. So I think we should discuss that later if and when we choose to increase the number.
Yep, thanks, Nathan. And generally how that's done is that in the next election, there would be, if the increases by 2 counselors, you would elect one for a 4-year term and one for a 2-year term, and then they would stay staggered. And so instead of what we have now, which is 2 counselors and a mayor on 1 2-year, and then 2 counselors on the other 2-year, then you would have 3 counselors and the mayor on 1 2-year and 3 counselors on the other. Typically how it's done and what we would probably write in. Zachary, please.
So I wonder, like, how much experience one would need to be a city councilor, because I was talking to the president of the city council yesterday, and I was asking him about his experience, and he said that he was on the planning committee for like 7 years, and I think he's still on there, like continuing, like a lot of experience. And for the newer people, I feel like, I don't know, I wonder how much one would need to dedicate to be more involved with the community so we can really diversify it and strengthen our ties with Tigard's youth.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary. And we will be talking about actually the qualifications for someone to run for council. Generally, there isn't a experience requirement, though I think people who are voting like to vote for someone with some experience. And so it becomes a de facto expectation. All right, I don't see any other hands. So the question that I am hearing is, does the committee recommend expanding the council to 6 counselors? Does this sound correct? Okay, so a yes vote would be yes for 6 counselors. A no vote would be not 6 counselors, an other option.
And that's the 6 counselors and a mayor.
6 counselors and a mayor, yes. So, yeah, you would be electing 3 counselors and a mayor, and then 3 counselors on the off years. Okay, would someone like to motion for this vote?
I'll motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other,
Second. Yeah.
any discussion? Okay, Harold Krager,
Yes.
Derek Lawson,
Yes.
Jason Snyder,
Yes.
Jeanette Shaw,
Yes.
John Cook,
Yes.
Karen Emerson,
Yes.
Lindsay Murphy, oh, Lindsay might have been muted.
Yes. Sorry. There we go.
Margaret Doherty,
Yes.
Nathan Jackson,
Yes.
Tony Simpson,
Yes.
and Zachary Claremont.
Yes.
The vote of 11 yeses to 0 noes, the committee has recommended that Tigard expand its council to 6 counselors. Thank you all very much. So moving on to a deeply related topic, we're going to talk about how those counselors are selected. So it's interesting based on, actually, Nathan, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I didn't know if we needed to discuss the question of the youth counselor now or later.
Table that. I'm going to talk with Jason offline. I did a quick Google search. I was only finding youth advisory councils, not youth counselors, but I am going to do some more research just to dot that I and cross that T for us.
And Kim, I'll put you in touch with people at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I think that's probably the best connection there.
Perfect. I appreciate that. So we've selected, or we've recommended 6 counselors. Deeply intertwined topic is how those counselors are selected. So interestingly, while there's a lot of information about things like strong mayor versus council manager, there's not as much publicly available information around how counselors are selected. there's more around selecting for geography in the pros and cons, but there's more than just that option, especially used in the state. So we're going to just talk about them together as a group, and I encourage everyone to kind of thinking through some of the pros and cons in your own mind to add to these, because this is kind of what Shelby and I came up with, and we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So same breakdown for geographies, and these are the same 30 cities that have populations between 20,000 and 700,000 for counselor selection. So in cities that are greater than 70,000, 5 select by geographic location, and 3 select at large and by position number. So just to clarify what that is, so in that last election, we had now Counselor Hu and Counselor Singh were both running for those 4-year terms. And it was the top 2. So when you got your ballot, you selected the top 2, and then there was a couple other folks that were also on that ballot, and the top 2 win. When you were running by position number, they would have, if they had both become counselors, they would have maybe run for positions 1 and position 3, and then you only vote for 1 in that position number. So instead of a top 2, people have to select the position number that they're running, and then they campaign specifically against other folks who have also selected that position number. Okay. So in cities with populations between 70,000 and 35,000, again, not including Tigard, 2 are at large and by position number, 2 are by geographic location, 2 are by geographic location, but elected at large. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So those are, you can select to run almost like a position number, but let's say you wanted, let's say Tigard went to this, this method and somebody wanted to run under the Metzger. So they're living in Metzger, they run as the Metzger counselor against all other counselors who are also running for the Metzger seat, and the entire city would then vote on that seat. So it's a little bit of a different spin. Normally, when we think about by geographic location, you would run for the Metzger seat, and folks within Metzger would elect the Metzger seat. So this is a hybrid between the electing at large and then electing by geographic location. And so 2 cities in Oregon between populations of 35 and 70,000 elect counselors by that method. And then 1 elects purely at large, and this is what Tigard currently does. And then for cities with less than 35,000, 7 cities elect purely at large, 3 are by geographic location, 2 are at large and by position number, 1 is geographic location and elected at large. And then 1 is by geographic location and position number. I believe they have 6 counselors, and they divided their ward into 3, or they divide their city into 3 wards. They have 2 counselors from each ward, and then they have position numbers that they're assigned against. So basically it's like if you took all of the different methods and you put it into 1. So let's go through these in a little more detail. So when we talk about at large, these are candidates are considered by all qualified electors in the city, positions of the same length of term and the same duties. Those positions are elected by a top X method. So in Tigard's current case, it's top 2. With 6 counselors, it would be a top 3. This can make it more difficult to target opposition to a single individual when you are running in a top 2 or top 3 race versus like by a position number. So if you were running specifically because you disagreed with a current sitting counselor who was then the incumbent, it would make it more difficult to run that kind of race compared to position number. It can lead to geographies that are underrepresented, and elected officials represent all community members rather than their home territory. So looking at large and by position number, it's a little different. It does make it easier to run a race against an individual. Still has some of the same downsides. It can lead to geographies that are underrepresented. Elected officials will still represent all community members rather than their home territory. And one of the things when it comes to position number is it helps when you have more political knowledge in order to choose maybe a more advantageous position if you're getting into politics for the first time. So it can require a little more background knowledge, not necessarily, but it can be helpful, more helpful in this context. So looking at by geographic location, so this is when you reside in a location and then you are elected by other folks who also reside in that location. It can lead to better representation of all geographies in a jurisdiction. Elected officials might feel that they represent their home territory rather than the entire city or jurisdiction. One of the positives that came up that I was actually surprised by when I was doing research was this can actually lower the cost of campaigning and encourage more newcomers because you're campaigning over less surface area and you're trying to get your neighborhood more than the entire city. But it does lead to, at least on the city side, higher administrative costs. So when we talk about dividing up what are these geographies that folks are running into, we have to hire, demographers and put together a process for doing that. And then there's also the administrative costs that come from people needing to know what is their geography that they're in and making sure that they're properly registered for that, in addition to being registered for their proper city and county. So there are costs there. And then we talk about geographic location and elected at large, which I was surprised there were as many cities that use this method as there was. Again, can lead to better elected representation in all geographies. In this case, while you're still nominated or kind of choosing to run from your home territory, you would still feel that you represent all community members because you are campaigning across the entire city. And it technically would have lower administrative costs than the other, because you no longer have individuals needing to define what geography that they're from, but it still would require those same administrative costs of defining what are these geographic boundaries. And those are the slides around the different geographies, or the different counselor selection options that are currently at play. And Jason, please.
Kind of a practical question and maybe a legal one, Carol and Shelby. Not sure if you guys immediately know the answer to this, but I've never really given a ton of consideration to the geographic thing, but as you were describing it, and it seems pretty common, I was sort of thinking through more of the details. So here's the question. Are we as a jurisdiction allowed to set up the geography, if we were to go that route, in something other than the 8 precincts we have? Or do they have to follow the precincts, and a precinct is either in a group or not in a group? John, you're saying no. You know the answer to that?
Well, my understanding, is they have to be approximate number of people. Mm-hmm. And so from that standpoint.
Yeah, I understand that intent, but this is more of a practical legal, like, I don't even know how the elections office would deal with it. If maybe they'd make new precincts. I don't know, but I'm guessing that they have to have a discrete, like, you're either in or not in a certain spot. And maybe Tigard hasn't mattered that much because we have 8 precincts and everything's at large. And the school board is also at large, but by position number. So I'm just wondering, like, are we allowed, what are the limitations if there are any?
We're certainly allowed to. I think Hillsborough only has maybe 3 wards. I think they have 3 wards and 2 counselors per ward. So I have to imagine they have more precincts than 3 in a city that size.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, that's not the issue. The issue is if you have one precinct that you want to put in two areas, consolidating them is not a problem. It's going the other direction that's a problem.
Right. I'm just saying that from what I saw, cities were choosing their geographies completely separate from what the existing precincts were. So I have to imagine that we would have to work out those details, but I have to imagine that other cities have gone before us, so it wouldn't be, but I don't think we have to match the current precincts by any means.
All right.
Zena, please.
So the question I have about the geographical selection base. So is the candidate supposed to live in that geographical area?
Yes. So by geographic location, the candidate would be required to live within that geography in order to represent it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thanks, Zena. And Tony, please.
I was just hoping to maybe kind of revisit the geographic location plus position versus geographic location versus at large, and just kind of the distinction between those two. Just kind of revisit those a little bit because they're similar but different. So
yeah. So let's say you live in the Bull Mountain area. So if you lived in Bull Mountain and you were in a by geographic location, you could say, I choose to run in Bull Mountain. You get your signatures, you get yourself on the ballot. And then when someone from Bull Mountain gets their ballot in the mail, they would see, oh, you live in Bull Mountain because that's your address. And they would have on their ballot Bull Mountain, let's say the 3 candidates that you and 2 other people are running. But somebody who's living in Metzger would see Metzger and the 3 candidates that are running out of Metzger. And then when the council is fully formed, you would have, let's say, your 6 counselors, and you would have your counselor from Metzger, your counselor from Bull Run, your counselor from South Tigard, et cetera, up on the dais. If you are electing by geographic location, or if you're running by geographic location, but electing at large, you would have, when you get your ballot in the mail and you're running for Bull Mountain, you would see yourself and the 2 other candidates who are running for Bull Mountain, but you'd also see the candidates running from Metzger and the candidates running from South Tigard as well on that ballot. And then you would elect from there. And so while on the dais, you would see candidates from those home geographies. Every one of them would have been voted on by the entire population of Tigard. Does that make it more clear?
That doesn't answer the position part of it, though.
Oh, sorry, you were asking about the position part?
Well, he was asking for the distinction between at-large by position versus, I mean, I think, Tony, please clarify. But
Yes, sorry if I misunderstood your question.
Yes, that was the difference between at large and geographic location and position and geographic location.
Oh,
those 2 combined methods.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we do geographic location and position. So for example, if we had, because we've just recommended 6 counselors, if we said that there were 3 wards, then you could have, and then you would have 2 counselors per ward. And if for some reason you didn't stagger your counselors, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you didn't, and so you had counselors from Ward 1 who ran at the same time, you would have position 1 and position 2. So when you were choosing to run for the Bull Mountain seat, there's 2 seats and you would select which one you were running for. Similar to if you were running at large and by position number, you would select your position, but you'd have to be living in Bull Mountain and then choose your position number and then run on that ticket. It's only one city does it. I'm not really sure why you wouldn't just stagger your counselors. It doesn't make any sense to me, but they do it that way. And Dolly, please.
Okay. I'm thinking more of I prefer to see an at-large thing versus the by area, because the by area or the geographic thing to me is counterproductive to what any city should be doing as far as unifying the citizens. If you're putting it out there as we're going to vote by geographic location, then it divides us again. Oh, it's bad enough that we're saying, oh, you're from Bull Mountain. Oh, you're from North, or you're from this area. It's bad enough that that exists. And if we're working towards, in line with making us walkable, neighborly, etc., dividing us by definition, as far as election especially is concerned, I think is not good optically or just for a future, an objective. And secondly, just as you said, the very fact that we have this conversation and we have logistical concerns on the admin part of making this happen is confusing enough for us here. I just can imagine how much next door will be so busy when this comes to the general citizenry. So I think the underrepresentation portion could actually be solved by, as John said, social media. If people are going to be concerned, they will make noise about it.
Thanks, Dolly. And so just so everyone knows, we are going to go to breakout rooms to have that really smaller and deeper conversation. So no, Dolly, I hadn't said anything. So thank you for bringing that up. So in this group, if there's any more clarifying questions, we can do that here, and then everyone can have those great conversations in the rooms. And Nathan, please.
I apologize if I am forgetting this from some of the materials we received a while ago, but I was curious what data we had on like the relative scale of difference in administrative costs between the different methods, just in, in having those elections versus at-large elections.
Yes, so the cost of the election itself doesn't change at all. It's just the cost of what it would take to divide up what are those geographies. And that would be, we don't have like any idea what that number would be, but you can imagine that it would be maybe a committee like this, definitely a demographer, economist being hired by the city in order to help us with that work. But the actual election costs would still be covered completely by the county because it would be a November election. Margaret, please.
Okay, actually, I just have a question, and maybe it's premature about the, you sent out the precinct map as part of the thing, and it was broken up and there are little circles on there. Are those little circles people who are city councilors or have been city councilors, and that's where they lived?
Yes, and
Okay.
so you'll see little clusters in some places where there's like 2 or 3 circles around
Right.
location, and that is a individual counselor who served multiple terms.
Oh, okay. And the reason is I was looking at this and precinct 400 is the only one that has never had anybody. And also precinct 427 have never had anybody who had served on city council.
Right.
According to this.
Yeah, and that might go back to Jason's point about the precincts don't matter as much as that was just one way of dividing up the city to provide like some context rather than just looking at a blank.
Well, and most precincts are divided up by population, like so much of it. So, and geographic, because I noticed there was a little gerrymandering in precinct 400 because it goes like this, then it goes.
Yep. Thank you, Margaret.
Drive down to see what that is.
Thank you for bringing up that map. It was fun. And John, please.
I have 2 comments. I sort of want to answer Margaret's point on that. It's based on population by precinct of full build out. So 427 doesn't have build out yet for River Terrace, so it eventually will have. So from that standpoint, it has a very small number. If you actually look at the number of electorates in there, it's very small.
River Terrace.
Yeah, 411 and 427 are all part of. 411 is all River Terrace, and 427 is just off of that. My comment is we used to in Tigard elect by position, and we changed that in our charter. And we can talk about that in our small groups, but I just want to let everybody know we used to do that and we changed that.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I think the original charter, it was not by position and then it was voted in and then it was voted out. Yeah. Interesting changes over the last 60 years. Okay, so if those are all the clarifying questions, then we will head to the breakout rooms. The question for discussion is, does the committee recommend keeping the current at-large method for electing counselors or recommend an alternate method? And we'll spend a significant amount of time. Let's say we'll set it at 30 minutes for now in the group. So it's 6:40 now, so at least until 7:10, and then Shelby and I will talk and or watching what's going on in case there needs to be more time. So, and it'll be the same breakout rooms that you were in before. Okay, see you all soon. I almost did that thing where I ended the entire meeting instead of closing the breakout rooms.
Oh, Kim.
We were very close to disaster. Fixed it.
Eliminate the rest of the people. Oh, they're here.
Yeah, it gives everybody a minute to finish their conversation. We'll start with, well, when everybody gets in, we'll start with group one this time.
I clicked prematurely. There you go.
Okay, welcome back. I got a chance to be in both rooms, so I know the conversations were really interesting. This time around, let's start with room one. Whoever your speaker was, I don't know if it was still Carol or someone else.
We didn't designate one. Different than Carol, I guess.
Carol took notes.
Okay, so it was a really good long discussion with a lot of good points made. I think that a concern with the jurisdictional or the geographical selection would be it would create more divisiveness. There was a concern about what if no one runs. It's a more complex process, and the another point was that if we, a good thing about that would be it'd be more open to newcomers. It was mentioned by some that they didn't feel that everyone is represented on the council here. But then also local voices can be heard through other means, more engagement, more activity on boards and committees. If we, some pros or some advantages to keeping at large, which was really popular, is that, people running are looking at themselves as representing the whole city and not just a geographical area. That people running should be interested in helping everyone and bringing us together rather than dividing us. We actually explored the combination of geographic and at large, and we're concerned that there's no mechanism for what will happen if no one runs in that area. And then there could be some remedies for that, but the more complicated it is, it would kind of make it easier for someone with more political savvy to be elected, and that doesn't really increase representation necessarily that we want. Basically, it's just seeing that geography divides us, and thinking of the big picture and being at large is probably more effective.
Thank you.
It was noted that we've come a long way too. When you look at councils, like when Mayor Snyder was elected, he mentioned that he was the young one in his 30s, and the rest were men, 60 and up. And look at that council then, and look at our council now, and you'll see some changes. So, we are getting more diverse.
And you weren't on the council then. Like, I'm talking about the council before you and I.
That was funny. Thank you, Carol. Anyone else from group one have anything to add to that summary? Okay, moving to group two.
Okay. We also felt that it should stay the same, that the counselors are voted for at large for a lot of the same reasons that Carol just kind of talked about. I think one specific thing about making it more complex that Jeanette pointed out was that Voter turnout is already pretty bad, and it's hard to get people to register to vote. It's hard to get people out in general. So further complicating a process is not necessarily helping with that. And then I think the other point too that John made was that when you're just running at large and not for a position, you're really letting people run and be voted on, hopefully just for their merits, rather than kind of pitting people against each other to pick a certain position to run for because they have the best chance against that one person. But it allows everyone to run on a more equal playing field. And so that was kind of a big piece of it too. But we were all in agreement that we should keep it at large.
Thank you. So I'm hearing from both groups a general consensus to keep it at large. Is there anyone who feels strongly for an option other than at large who would like to speak to the larger group? Okay. Zachary, please.
Well, we did, I mean, we all thought at large sounds good, but we did also discuss the opportunity that we could do ranked choice voting. But then John Cook brought up a good story. So if he wants, he can tell it.
John, did you have a story about ranked choice voting? Maybe it's for
well,
later.
Zachary's point was that, it would be good maybe to look towards that. Portland's got some of that in their new system. And so maybe that it wasn't really part of our discussion. We just sort of brought it up because we had to kill 10 minutes. So I told a long story that I'll make really short, and that when one of the mayors died, there were still 4 councilors left, and 8 people put their name in to be appointed the mayor. And they were all interviewed, and then each of the councilors voted, ranked them in order 1 through 8. And then they added those points together, and the person with the least points won. I got a 1, a 2, a 7, and an 8. I tied for 4th and 5th, right in the middle. And the person that won didn't get a first place vote. He got the most 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place votes. And that is how the mayor was elected. So that was Mayor Griffiths.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. Thanks, Zachary, for encouraging it. Okay, so what I'm hearing, the question is, does the committee recommend retaining the current at-large election process? So I would hear a motion to move this question forward.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Carol Krager.
Yes.
Derek Lawson.
Yes.
Jason Snyder.
Yes.
Jeanette Shaw.
Yes.
John Cook.
Yes.
Karen Emerson.
Yes.
Lindsay Murphy.
Yes.
Margaret Doherty.
Yes.
Nathan Jackson.
Yes.
Tony Simpson.
Yes.
And Zachary Claremont.
Yes.
Okay, 11-0. This committee has recommended that Tigard retain the current at-large, which combined with the previous recommendation for 6 councilors would result in top 3 votes going forward after the period of some introducing the 2 new councilors. Thank you all. And John, if this is about the 4-year terms, that's my next step. Okay, go ahead.
No, I just would like to see if Holly would comment on repeat the comment she made in our group about how she felt something yesterday and how different it was today.
Yeah, so just yesterday in my reading, I thought the whole concept of geographical was really interesting and kind of leaning that direction. And then just hearing everybody, especially in the big group, right before we left, former Mayor Cook made a comment about how it didn't start that way in the charter, and then it was, and then it was out. And so that just, this whole conversation today really changed my mind or my way of thinking from what I was thinking when I was doing my reviews last night. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you, John, for encouraging Holly to bring that comment. Thank you, Holly, for sharing it with the group. It's the beauty of coming together in this forum to talk about these issues and to listen to one another and change our minds. And I just really value everyone giving us this time on Monday evenings. The second question that I completely forgot to introduce before we went into the breakout rooms, and Karen kindly reminded me of, and then Shelby related to the other group, was the question of the length of term for a counselor. So last week we talked about the length of term for a mayor and settled on 4 years. So for this group, so I'm going to start this time with group 2. Did you guys have any conversation, or what was, please describe your conversation around term length?
It was fairly brief because we were all in agreement. We would like to keep it at 4 years, continuing the staggering method. With the idea that 2 years is really not enough time. There's too much of a learning curve, that if someone's running for re-election, they're going to spend part of their term doing that, and that 6 years felt too long. So that was our thoughts on 4.
Thanks, Lindsay. And group 1, would you like to talk?
Pretty much a ditto. I don't know if Carol wants to say a bunch more, but that was almost exactly what our conversation was.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, I see a lot of consensus. I'm not going to pull out the voting. I think if everyone agrees that 4 years, unless anyone feels very strongly against 4 years, one like longer or shorter. But yep, we're in agreement on 4 years. Okay. Wow, we got through a lot tonight. Expanding the council, continuing to select council by at-large vote, and retaining the 4-year term. So let's talk a little bit about where we're going next week. Zachary, please.
Didn't we talk about youth member at the beginning, right?
Yes, we are tabling youth member, and I'm talking to Jason or the mayor's council offline, and we'll bring back any additional information.
Okay, so when would we discuss it? Probably like next meeting or after, during a free meeting?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to hear that ASAP, I guess.
And Kim, honestly, whatever we do with that too may impact the number of counselors. So we should probably, like, in context here, that's kind of that's a little bit of a piece that's dependent on the rest, a little bit.
We'll bring it forward as soon as we can. It may take a little extra research. Understand the concern about having potentially an even number of counselors. Thank you. So going forward, so we made a lot of decisions last week and this week, and I know Shelby's been hard at work putting together the updated shell. And it's been a while since we've all had a chance to look at the shell and review it. There's some areas that are largely governed by state law that we've now filled in as well around things like quorum and meeting protocol. So our goal is that we'll send you the shell before our next meeting. We do have a 2-week break before our next meeting because next Monday is the State of the City. So that's when we had originally been scheduled. And so instead we're meeting today. I encourage everyone in this group to attend the State of the City next week if you've got the time. I'm sure you can still register online. Should be a good time and very relevant to the work that this group is doing. So next meeting, we will have the updated shell. We'll spend some time looking over it, making sure that everything that's been drafted is in line with this group's direction. And we'll also spend quite a bit of time, I believe, on term limits is our next topic. And then I'll have an update, hopefully, on the youth advisory versus youth counselor style position. Any questions about where we're going next week? Jeanette, please.
Thank you. And I think and I apologize if it's for the next meeting, but the council president term, I think that's something we were going to address too.
It is, yes. So on the meeting guide, so term limits is next. I know we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. The topic immediately after that is the council president term, as well as their powers and how they're selected. And then we'll go into vacancies, recall, and the resignation requirement, and then qualifications of council members is the next couple meetings. Got a busy docket. All right. Well, everyone have a great evening. Attend the State of the City if you can next week, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.